the agenda for today is that we are going to start with Jackie. She's going to talk us through biomimicry and design. Then we are going to hear from Kevin Frediani on systems thinking, and we will finish today's session with a presentation of Circular Tayside project by myself. If you have any questions, please either type them in the chat or keep them until the end, because we will have a Q&A session for 10 minutes at the end of the session. So, yeah, let's start with Jackie.
Thank you, Vaso, and welcome everyone to this talk. I will just share my screen and hopefully all will be well. And can I just check that people can see that okay? Okay, thank you, Vaso. So welcome to this session that Vaso has kindly organised. I am currently the Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is biomimicry as a model, mentor and measure, and what biomimicry actually is. So it comes from bios, meaning life, and mimesis, meaning to imitate, is the conscious emulation of nature's genius, and study nature's best ideas, and then to imitate these forms, processes and systems, not only to solve human problems, but to create the conditions that are conducive to life. Okay, my screen's not going to share, and it seems to be when people are entering. Okay, here we go. So if we think about how we have in the past been inspired by nature, we've copied nature as a source of inspiration. So the Chinese 3,000 years ago tried to make artificial silk. In the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci, of course, based many of his studies observing how birds fly, designed some of the first human machines for flight. And copying, and this is a quote from Democritus, copying animals, we learn the most important things. We become the spider student. Imitating its sewing techniques, we learn from the swallow to build houses and from the nightingale to sing. These are a few examples where we have been inspired by nature in the past. Joseph Baxton's London Crystal Palace for the Great Exhibition of 1851 was actually inspired by the water lily, and we can see someone holding an example of the underneath of a water lily. And of course, the 1889 World's Fair, the Eiffel Tower was the tallest building in the world. And Gustav Eiffel applies structural studies from the femur bone. The 20th century then, of course, finds in Art Nouveau the introduction of a key concept called biodesign, where vegetable shapes were used in industrial mass production in the search for lightness and elegance. Vaso, next slide, please.
Let's see if it's going to play. Here we go.
So what we're doing is actually thinking about nature in a slightly different way to these previous examples. And what we need to do is actually recognise that emulating living systems add an intrinsic ethical value for our culture. It also identifies biomimicry and the method as a tool to achieve ecological design and a healthy innovation, and understand that biomimetic design tendencies can be a second step in the creation of a meaningful future. And I'll explain a little bit later why I'm saying it's a second step and not a first step. Next slide, please, Vaso. So the question is, what is biomimicry? What can nature teach us? And if we think that there are 3.8 billion years of evolution, there are countless animals, plants, and microbes that are thriving today. And actually, what's flourishing today are the best ideas. Nature has already solved a lot of the problems that we are now encountering or need to solve. Next slide, Vaso. Janine Ben-Use wrote the book Biomimicry and has established the Biomimicry Institute 3.8. And her method for looking at design is called Life's Principles. And we can see that they form adapt to changing conditions, being locally attuned and responsive, using life-friendly chemistry, being resource efficient where material and light is concerned, integrate development with growth, which is a really key point for any business, and evolving to survive. And that's the really, really important thing. So what is it about these 3.8 billion years of evolution that can actually teach us on Earth? And how can we think about our businesses slightly differently to accommodate these particular points and methods? Next slide, Vaso. So Life's Principles runs on sunlight, uses only the energy it needs. It fits form to the function. It recycles everything. It rewards cooperation. It banks on diversity. It demands local expertise, curbs excesses from within, and it taps the power of limits. And it's really important to think that what nature doesn't do is deplete the resources of another species. They work in tandem with one another. And there's a lovely phrase called mutualism, where different species work together to be able to survive together. And the next slide, Vaso. So, Life's Principles, it's a conscious intent, it's a design intent that emulates, it's not a direct copy, and we're looking at 3.8 million years of nature's genius. And here we can see the bullet train that mimicked the way in which a kingfisher enters the water without losing speed. Thank you, Vaso. So if we think about these three areas, the model, the mentor, and the measure, next slide, Vaso, we begin to understand how we can think about nature as a model. So what is nature's designs? Where can we find the designs? What are the chemical recipes that nature uses? And most importantly, what are the ecosystem strategies? It's looking at the bigger picture. We can't just look at one particular item without looking at the whole. Next slide, please, Vaso. Sorry, this should have been updated. It's nature as measure. So nature is an ecological standard through which we can judge our innovations. So how does my design fit in to all of the different aspects that we're designing it for? And most importantly, is it life promoting? And I dared to slightly change Janine Ben-Use, so where she's saying nature provides the conditions conducive to life, I would also like to think that design also promotes the conditions that are conducive to life. Thank you, Vaso. Next slide. So how do we think about nature as a mentor? It's a new way of looking at and valuing what nature can give us. Instead of seeing nature as a source of raw materials, see nature as a source of ideas for innovation. And I'm going to show you some examples. Vaso? So mimicking nature means we have to look at the forms. What are the forms in nature? But also what are the processes? What are the biological processes, the chemical processes? And ultimately, what system do they fit into? So if we're applying them to our own business products or our services, how does our products and services fit into the wider community, the social aspect, the environmental aspects, etc. Vaso? So here we have some examples of bioarchitecture. The gardens by the bay in Singapore are an absolute spectacle if anyone has had the delight to visit them. The Eden project we will probably be more familiar with, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the Spanish by Santiago Calatrava because that would be an absolute disaster on my behalf. But there's some really, really good examples of where we have looked to nature for inspiration in forms as well as functions. Next slide, Vaso. Some biotextiles. We're all familiar with Velcro and the story about the Swiss scientist who went out and had all these burrs stuck to him, and when he looked at them under a microscope, he was able to see that it was a hook and loop system that nature had designed. The Speedo fast skin that was mimicking the way in which a shark moves through water, and the components, the structure of that skin, and Morphotex, where we're looking at a colour reflective textile. Next slide, please. Interior design, the hermit crab house, bioluminescent panels, and a flower pavilion for London's Design Festival. Next slide, please. Product design, so additive manufacturing, where we're looking at plants and the show lamp, the bone chair, which is very obvious, and the camp woodpecker by Franco Lodato, mimicking the woodpecker. Next slide, please. Jewellery and ceramics, there's some excellent examples there. Radiolarian collection, which is focusing on the nervous system. Coral tiles, mimicking heather, and caterpillar collection by Jill Plattner. Next slide, please. Graphic design, it's a little bit more difficult to apply this, but when we think about packaging, there's a good example of fruit packaging where they've mimicked the texture of the strawberry and the way in which it repels water. The butterfly alphabet, and the way in which we can visualize digitally organisms or elements of nature. Thank you, Vaso. Transport design, the Mercedes-Benz Bionic car based on the boxfish, mimicking the jellyfish in the air jelly, and dirigible, sorry, my foreign pronunciation is not very good, by Jean-Marie Masseau. Thank you, Vaso. This is a really interesting project. In a way it fits into textiles, but there's a woman called Neri Oxman that's been working with biomimicry for many years, coupled with 3D printing. And these are mimicking externally the way in which organs might move nutrients around the body. So each piece intends to hold life-sustaining elements contained within 3D printed vascular structures. And the idea is that living matter within these structures will ultimately transform oxygen for breathing, photons for seeing, biomass for eating, biofuels for moving, and calcium for building. And you might think, why would we need to do that? So Neri Oxman and our team at MIT were actually looking at the way in which life could be sustained on other planets. How could the human species be sustained on Mars or Saturn or Jupiter, where there were particular nutrients and elements missing? Vaso? So the question, and what I'd like to touch on now, is how do we promote biomimicry at DJCAD? We have a module that we've delivered since 2012 called Design Values, Issues and Ethics. It's a level 3 expansive module, and it's available to all undergraduate programs. and students opt to do this module. It's been fully signed up since 2012, and we have students from fine art, jewellery, interiors, illustration, graphic design, textiles, interactive media and product design. And the module was really established based on the Higher Education Academy recommendations in 2009, and also the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development and their strategic goals for reforming education. Vaso, next slide. And I'm trying to give you a bit of an immersive experience here, and I'd like you to just listen to this slide for a little minute.
This is Jackie. I want you to find a peaceful space in your garden, in a wood, in a field, somewhere quiet. I want you to shake your arms, and I want you to take a big, deep breath in through your nose and exhale. Close your eyes. Take another big, deep breath. And again, let that go. I want you to listen to the sounds around you. Listen to the birds. Listen to the trees, the breeze if there's any. Feel the feet beneath the ground beneath your feet. Is it soft? Are you on the grass? And just listen. Use your senses. Think about what you're hearing. What are the smells that surround you? And just listen to nature. And breathe. I want you to open your eyes. I want you to look around. Look up. Just be at one with nature. Big deep breaths. Listen to the birdsong. And relax.
So most importantly, this module actually takes place at the Botanic Gardens in Dundee. We use the education centre there. It's 1 day a week for 10 weeks. And step one is that we take the students out into the gardens and we undertake that exercise. We get them to smell what's around them, to listen to the sounds, and then we do a few little exercises that just helps them to engage with nature. Now, the project that they're working on is actually to design an aspect of a community, and they pull different aspects out of the hat, but these are the ones that we cover. It's housing, water, communication, food, health, education, and transport, because they're all aspects of a community that we need to survive and, most importantly, thrive as a species. So they're part of our system and they're elements of a system. Vaso, next slide, please. So when we're taking students out into the gardens, and you can see some examples here, we're re-engaging them with nature. We're stimulating the senses and trying to reawaken that instinct that all of us have within us. We're promoting biophilic values and recognising that biophilia is the first step in the pursuit of an ethical design intention. And actually, we're also asking them to awaken a self-realisation and understand where their values are positioned and that they've been constructed culturally by where they have been situated, by their parents, by the institutions they've been a part of, and understand more about themselves. Next slide, please, Vaso. And this then leads us on to the second step, where biomimicry is used as a tool to achieve ecological design innovation. It cultivates the creative inspiration and the meaningful strategies, and it deepens an awareness of that ecological intelligence. And it's a group project, so it's collective realisation. And it starts very much with researching organisms that are related possibly to their particular subject. And that will become clear in some of the examples that I show. So next slide, please. Resilience is really important within a community, so we do a resilience island workshop where they gather things from the gardens. They build their own island in 2 teams. They spend a lot of time thinking where they might have agricultural land, growing food, rivers, etc. And then they swap teams and destroy each other's island to their disgust. And it's quite interesting to observe their body language, because by that point they've actually become quite attuned to their island. They've begun to love it, they've given it a name, and suddenly another team is destroying it, but it represents the environmental disasters that can happen, that can destroy a community. And then what they have to do is rebuild it, thinking how they can rebuild it with the natural materials. They've actually included Lego bricks in the first scenario, but they don't have access to these unnatural resources in the second step. Vaso? So these are some of the examples that students have created. This is a communication team, and they investigated 3 species of bats that all survived within the same cave and how they communicated with one another. And they also looked at capuchin monkeys and the pitcher plant. So their solution was to take seeds and design a method of communication, creating whistle patterns that would signal either danger, food, or other resources such as water that might be needed. Next slide, please. In terms of the food system, this particular group looked at Dundee and discovered that Zosteris seagrass is a really resilient material. It can be grown on land, it can be grown in the sea, in our estuary, as well as that when it's eaten by fish or other animals, the nutrients then, if we were to hunt and gather, these nutrients would also pass to us within our food system. Byproducts were also things such as hatch for shelter. So we can already start to see that although a group is looking at food, they were having to begin to think about water, think about shelter and other perspectives. Vaso, next slide, please. And I'm going to let you watch this film.
Water is everywhere we look and vital to life. It's one of our most precious properties, and there is seemingly an endless supply. However, science tells us otherwise. This is why we need to find a natural yet efficient water conservation system. In order to create a successful water system, we look to nature for inspiration, as nature is self-sufficient, much like our ecosystem design. We based our ecosystem on the island of Cyprus, an environment with a hot and dry climate. This was done in order to ensure our water system would work globally. Our ecosystem is covered in water collecting devices, the shape of which was derived from the trumpet pitcher plant. The device uses its funnel-like structure to collect water molecules from the air, much like the headstander beetle. These devices are made from a linen canvas, which is coated in wax in order to maximize water collection. Once our devices collect enough water, it is then transported down the funnel and into bamboo channels, which distributes the water between the fields and houses. These houses are made from microfoam tiles, and the structure is made up of several bamboo channels, which collects rainwater and transports it through an organic filtration system, which consists of 8 levels of various materials. Once this is done, the rainwater is stored in an underground container beneath each house. There is also a second container, which stores sewage water. This system ensures the availability of water for future generations to come.
What's important to note is that everything's very much a system. We use the Sustainable Development Goals to connect the water to housing, the housing to food, and to allow students to understand that you cannot look at one aspect in isolation. It's really important that you can connect the dots. So if you're looking to use biomimicry as a tool for design innovation within your organisation, you can use it in many different ways, but don't look at it in isolation. Always look to the bigger picture and to understand how and what can be impacted by that design. And I know that Kevin's going to go over systems theory in much more detail, and hopefully that will help you connect the dots. It just remains for me to say thank you very much for tuning in today and for listening to us. Thank you, Vaso.
Thank you very much, Jack. It was a fascinating presentation, and it's going to be available on our website. We are also going to make a YouTube video out of today's session and make sure that the videos are playing, so you can find all of that later in the week on our channels. Yeah, it was a fascinating presentation. What I wanted to kind of introduce now is that it was lovely to see how this equilibrium we see today in nature has started from little micro activities from here and there, and it kind of was a bottom-up approach, and now we're seeing the end result. But I would really like to hear from Kevin now how we can approach this equilibrium from a systems thinking perspective. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just checking, Vaso, that you can see the slideshow.
Yeah.
Hopefully, mine's going to work now. So, good morning. I'm Kevin Frediani. I'm the curator at the Botanic Garden and look after the grounds at the university. I come with a background in what I like to think of as innovation in horticulture, things like the world's first commercial vertical farm, which I helped develop at Paynton Zoo as an exhibit to show the public that the very choices they make in where they procure their food from and the way that we use land unsustainably affects why animals, the wild conspecifics of the animals that people came to see in zoos were rare and endangered. We were effectively eating their habitat. That technology now has been evolved and given away, and it's now pretty well in every city around the world. But the genesis point was from a question about how do we live more sustainably on planet Earth. And what I'm going to try to do is give you an overview and use the Botanic Garden at University of Dundee as a way to look at systems thinking and explore through the circular economy canvas tool that Vaso helped share and introduce me to learn about our system and then look at the key insights that come out of it. The reason I'm sharing that in a very open way is because you hopefully can reflect on that and see a way for your business to think differently about the way that you do your work. So the University of Dundee Botanic Gardens is located in Scotland, in the east. It's bathed by the warmth of the maritime environment. It sits on the longest river, the River Tay, that bypasses Dundee. And it's 27 acres of south-facing gentle slope with a deep loam soil that goes down to 1 meter. So if any of you are horticulturalists, you'll understand why I'm there. The other thing that's unique about it is that it's got an ecological basis to its planting. It's a very young garden, only created in 1971. And rather than set out taxonomically the A's to Z of the plant world with the last orchid being collected from someplace else, it's actually laid out to show the habitats and how they work as ecosystems. So that's a fascinating aspect to the Botanic Garden. However, I want to explore our shared concept, the mental models that we have of Botanic Gardens, because I'm sure that many of you won't be surprised by pictures of beautiful exotic plants like this echium on the left, reaching up into the sky from the Canary Islands, or these diaceas from South Africa, the pink flowers that radiate underneath it. So, plants from someplace else growing in a temperate climate, or indeed the glass houses, the tropical houses. We talked about Eden earlier. These spaces we create where we take you, immerse you someplace else in plants, sometimes in zoos with animals from someplace else, to inspire you, to entertain you, to educate you. But Botanic Gardens are so much more. We actually don't help ourselves as an institution. I'll come back to that later on. But the leading institution, BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, recognises Botanic Gardens as institutions that hold documented collections of living plants for the purpose of scientific research, conservation, display and education. Well, I don't think that's going to make you come and visit me, is it? But that does say factually what we do, but it only touches the iceberg of the potential, because we have got social, environmental and economic potentials. Here's an example of a young girl that came to me with a fairy door that was being created during COVID, asked if she could actually place that in the Botanic Garden. It spawned now a way of us using plants and these habitats from around the world to introduce the stories, the backstories of the cultures and the people and the animals and the plants. And through that initial point of contact from that girl, I've now met an artist who created those fairy doors, and we've got a new interpretive trail that's being developed that will be in place for next year, that will help take people not only someplace else, but give them a better mental model and experience and empathy with different cultures from around the world. We're also measuring our ecosystem service benefits, and we're trying to understand how the plants growing in the Botanic Gardens contribute to the life and well-being and environment of Dundee. If you think about it, with climate change, the very plants that we've got in our streets and cities aren't going to be the ones that we need to thrive and live and survive in 70 years' time. +2 or +4, gosh, if we get to +4 degrees, oh, that's not so good, is it? But modifying that environment through plants, we know, has a tremendous opportunity for us to bioengineer our cities, to redesign them, to be biophilic by nature. There's another benefit that you've probably all experienced through COVID of just getting out by nearby nature for our own health and well-being. We need to be connected, and not just with people, but we need to be connected with the wider environment around us. Of course, there's a space for us to grow those rare and protected species. The Flora of Angus here charts the demise of plants over 300 years of land use change from the Middle Ages emerging out to the 20th century, where we lost, not in terms of numbers of species, we actually gained species of introductions from gardens, but we lost diversity. 90% of the diversity went. So we still got the plants, but we got 1 or 2 of them in the hedgerow margins, but not growing as weeds in the barley fields or wheat fields. And the opportunity for ecosystem restoration at the landscape scale is part of the challenge that faces us in the 21st century. But let's not forget, in terms of the economic and the importance of crops and food and plant diversity for fibres, for fuel, for the food in our bellies, and the importance that Botanic Gardens hold for potentially unlocking what we only have 5 staple crops that we use at the moment. We've pretty well reduced the range of diversity to something where one disease can come through and wipe out a whole harvest. Now, I don't know about you, but that frightens me. And we can look at how we open that up and change things. Now, I've written about all of this stuff elsewhere, and there's a link below that you can pick up one of those journals through Seboldia, that's held by the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh, their journal on botanical horticulture. And that, you know, from history and culture to the beautification of our amenities, education, sustainability, science and conservation, all of those roles can be played by Botanic Gardens. What I'm trying to share with you is that Botanic Gardens are complex. They're not about individual plants. They're not about people. They're about something that comes together and is bigger than the sum of the parts. It's got inputs and outputs. It's got feedback loops that are both reinforcing. They can take you up and enhance, but they can also work in the opposite direction and take us down. If we think about things like pesticide use in a garden and the detriment that has now through leaching into our watercourses and on amphibians and other biological life. But there's also moderating feedback loops that allow us to stay as a stable system that sequesters carbon. It attenuates water coming through and stops runoff into stormwater drains that causes problems further downstream. So it is by definition a complex adaptive system. Now, the model I inherited is not unusual in Botanic Gardens. It's a linear business model. And what I'm trying to do is move from a linear to a circular business model. But we have to understand where we've come from. And if you think about the Botanic Gardens, in 1971, we had a school of botany. We don't have that anymore. That disappeared in the 80s. As we reduced with our scientists and started looking at cells, in fact, our biological sciences today only teaches to the tissue level. It's in the art school that we look at the whole organism and the systems, which is, again, fascinating. So we've lost this link within the university to this space, 27 acres, sat down in the West, doing something else to visitors. And you can see that our adaptive steady state model says, okay, in execution, we've realized the Botanic Gardens. In transition, oh gosh, we don't need it anymore. Let's create a visitor experience and then try a whole series of things to let that business work. Some well run and they keep us going, some not so well run. And it ends up with a mess in the middle because we end up looking at individual aspects that are going wrong. But I want to say, strategy isn't about doing things. It's about doing things differently. It's not simply about doing them better than everyone else. So we can't copy and paste other successful models at other institutions. We've got to be fit for purpose. This comes back to what Jackie was talking about. You know, it's about being fit within your local niche. What does that look like? I love this quote from Schumacher about systems. And he says, any intelligent fool can make changes, but can make things bigger, more complex and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. Now, I'm not saying I'm a genius. Don't quote me on that one. But what I am saying is that we can be brave. In fact, now is the time to be brave and think very differently about our system. What I'm going to share with you now is a resource that Vaso at Circular Tayside and Circular Northeast have developed. It's based on a business model canvas, but with circular aspects reflected within it. It represents my system, and I'm being very open here. This is how our system looks to us today. It's complex, isn't it? And no, I'm not going to take you through all of it. But what I am going to do is talk about what we do. There is a mission, why we exist. We've inherited that phrase of acting locally and thinking globally from Patrick Geddes, who was the first professor of botany at the precursor to Dundee University here in the 1890s, when it was a school associated with the University of St Andrews. He called for a botanic garden, and it took another 70 years before we got one. But when we got one, this is how we do things. So we've got a business plan, we're a green space, we've got a collection plan, we've got visitor attraction, we've got cafes and all of those things. We've got partners and suppliers we work with. We use lots of different natural resources and technical resources, and there's energy inputs, but there's also costs associated with that. And then there's these positive and negative impacts that come out of it. On one level, we get a good day out. That's a huge benefit for an individual, but it's a huge cost behind that. We've got educational opportunities, we've got research opportunities, we've got carbon storage and sequestration. All of those things come into it. This is a little talk. This is a little video. I'm not going to share it with you, but it helps introduce systems thinking in a much better way than I can today in the short time I've got with you. But I'm going to try, so you can come back to this one later on. I'm going to talk about systems thinking by reflecting on mental models and say, if you think about the current way of doing things, the linear business model we've got, take, make, use and waste. And then if you think about the more circular one, where we've got this world that we are humans as part of the ecosystem, trying to live with nature, be inspired with that concept and not think about growth as the only way I'm ever going to be happy. Oh my gosh, I have to be like Kardashian and have £1 million in the bank. That's not success, is it? Surely. But being part of a community, feeling valued in the role that you contribute, and that somehow taking that value at a collective level and thinking how communities can grow back better is a mental model, a leap, a jump away from everything we've been trained in, everything you've experienced, because information that we're given and experience and the emotion through the senses and our timelines create the mental model constructs that limit us in the way that we think about potential. And I want to unlock that, because that's all systems thinking is. It's just a better way of understanding how we learn, how we perceive the world, and what the opportunities are. If you think about what's a system, so if I said to you that there's the two words, systems and thinking, are important. Thinking is the way that we take information from our senses and make sense of it with knowledge. Knowledge is modified with experience, and over time it forms our mental model, our construct. Some of you will be dog lovers. Some of you would have had an experience of being bitten, and you fear dogs. That your mental model of how you approach a dog in a street would be very different. One will pet it, the other one will cross the road and cross the street. Your bias unconsciously is informing the decisions that you make at work and how you run your business every day. If I now look at systems, systems are around us all the time. Our eyeball is a system in terms of the way our sight is a system with just, it composes parts, the cells, which on their own don't do anything, but when you put them collectively together in this organism, make sense of the world around us in a way that we can understand, bring in information. A heap is a collection of parts, unchanged if you add or take anything away from it. The arrangements of pieces are irrelevant, and the parts are not connected in any way that functions separately. Its behavior depends on its size or the number of pieces, if at all. And if I give you an example, if you look at the cells in cork, in a cork and a pile of corks, it doesn't matter if you take a cork away, it's still a pile of corks. But if you look at a living tree where the cork came from the bark of that tree, think about the interconnection between the roots, through the trunk, into the branches, the primary and secondary branches, and out through the leaves. The water transpiration that's coming out from the soil, going through that system into the air, cooling the plant, and at the same time being broken apart, the molecules broken apart through the energy released from light within those leaves, is creating the opportunity for carbon, the molecules of growth, us organisms, the food, the structures that we talked about before. Those emergent properties are more than the sum of their parts. There's a really good summary in O'Connor and McDermott, The Art of Systems Thinking, which I share at the bottom and recommend you to read. I think you can pick it up for about a penny on ABE books. So why systems thinking? Well, it helps us think deeper about what we're looking at, not just taking that surface level, the tip of the iceberg stuff, the events that we're seeing. We can see the underlying patterns of behavior. We can understand the structures that are informing that and influencing it. But if we deep dive, we can also understand our mental models that are informing the way of doing business. Again, Peter Senge, this Fifth Discipline, is the best business book I've ever read that understands systems and how to do things differently. And written in 1996 and still influencing a lot of businesses who are making that transition to a circular economy. Okay, so in summary, systems thinking has 4 parts. It's about interconnectedness, it's about synthesis, it's not about analysis, we'll go into that in a minute. It's about feedback loops, both positive, reinforcing, but also balancing that bring us back into a steady state. And it's about causality, cause and effect. So I'm going to take you now on my journey from to circular, from linear. It's beginning. I've only been here since October 2019, and over the next few years, I'm looking to work closer with Vaso, with Jackie, and many, many others to help us make this move, because it is a journey. It doesn't happen one day, I wake up, I'm a circular economy. I wish it was that simple. It also builds on some of the work that we've previously done. If you think about that analysis, the dissection into manageable units, the reductionist view has a role to play. We focused originally on the loss of the formal education link, and we invested in some of the parts. We created a tourist attraction. We looked at the educational engagements as a measure of success, and we thought about the research links and projects. These are still important. They help us in problem solving, working out how to break things down, but they're not all of the answer. Synthesis looks at the interconnectivity and looks at the emerging potential that we have. And when I use that lens to look at the world and this botanic garden, I can see that the emergent properties of botanic garden could benefit the university. They could also benefit the city of Dundee. If you think about those trees that we've been growing since 1971, in it, I've got a whole assembly of information about what's doing well with climate change, what's not doing so well, future trees that can thrive in our cities, and those that we should definitely avoid. Well, that could save a huge amount of money going into from civic purses into the wrong direction if we look to use that. And that research is beginning. But we also have, through our connections globally, better opportunity to work together for more benefit. So I've talked about ecosystem services, we've talked about the circular economy. there's also sustainable tourism. I mean, that's an oxymoron if I've ever read one, and I've studied sustainable tourism, but the potential impact of tourism to have benefit, if you want to see that, understand Costa Rica, where they have a better GDP than America, and they've done that over 20 years through sustainable tourism. They're one of the greenest countries in the world, and they haven't stripped out their assets, and they've regulated the control on what they do. If you want to understand unsustainable tourism, look at the global impact COVID's just had and what it's wiped out from our hotels, our visitor attractions, our eateries. My gosh, there's a whole linear business model that needs to change there if we're going to be more sustainable. And sorry for calling it out, but someone has to. So growing back better can't be growing back to the same as where we were pre-COVID. It's got to be something different. And I believe some of the solutions are in biomimicry and biophilia. I believe that we can look at our cities and our campuses being model sustainable ecosystems. And I think this is the time to prototype solutions. We've already begun doing that. I inherited the Makri project, which was the first passive house in Scotland, built back in 2013 in the Botanic Garden, completely off grid. And that hopefully becomes our researcher in residence portal within the Botanic Gardens to unlock further of this in the future. So I suggest bridging the gap. Analysis answers the what and the how, while synthesis answers the why and the what for. So now I'm going to look at that business model canvas and the lessons we've learned from that. There are a number of areas I can prototype. We can look at, rather than buying into an existing supply chain that takes, makes, uses and wastes, we can lease our fleet of vehicles and machinery that we use in the future and put back some sort of ownership in the supply chain for better utilizing those resources, because they're not going to come, I'm not going to throw them away at the end. I'm going to give them back to the partner I've shared with, and they are going to find a way of recycling and re-engineering those to keep them in service for longer. Some of the principles of the circular economy coming through. Because that's what I'm going to look for in my procurement attitude. I'm not just going to say I want to buy cheap. I want to buy smart. What are you doing for the environment with this kit? Because frankly, if you're not doing it, I don't want to invest in your business model. We're looking at heat recovery from our greenhouses. What's the sense in having a latent heat come through the glass houses being retained and then heating the hot air of Dundee? If I can, with heat recovery, turn that into electric energy and store that in batteries, in the macro micro, that we can then draw out at a later time, it takes me off grid. And this is something else, moving from the transition of a fossil fuel environment into a renewable environment. Prototyping recycling stations for plastic pots. We have thousands of plastic pots. Since 1971, every plant we've been growing is in plastic pots. I've now been buying pots which are not plastic. But what do I do with all those old plastic pots? Do I throw them away? No, that just causes another problem, doesn't it? I try to keep them in use as long as I can, but then ultimately find a solution for shredding that plastic, looking with a partner, potentially a community partner, to turn that into the viable base product to keep back into a technological cycle that supports sustainable living. Because we don't want this to become a pollutant in the growing environment, in the living environment. I want it to keep in a technological waste stream and production stream, if we can. We've been working with the School of Education and DJ CAD to look at art-based therapy within the garden. It started before COVID, but it's becoming critically important for families that are spread across Dundee, underprivileged, very, very difficult conditions that they live in. They can come to the Botanic Gardens, they can find a way of engaging with their children, but also with other parents and sharing the experience of lockdown and forming their own community. The potential for us to look at art-based therapy and nature-based therapy and nature-based education at the nursery level is something that's not lost on us. And we realize that not only do we have the opportunity to create a centre, we could also be a teaching base to teach a generation of people to think differently about how we engage our young and introduce and embed systems thinking and biophilia at an early age. Big thought processes, but this is just the beginning of exploring that. We've got the transition from the linear to circular visitor experience. And that's something that we'll be trialing out through the whole work that we do within the Botanic Gardens. But wider than that, I'm working on a community level across the catchment that brings water to the major towns and cities around Dundee, in Angus and Perthshire, at a bioregion. Because at that level, we can then start influencing how we can become more resilient as a population. And this is a project that through the university, we're working with Maine on the east coast of the North America, and with 120 other projects that have gone before us around the world, to understand better how communities can help themselves to prepare for what's coming and build back not only better, but maintain some of what we've got in terms of our cultural and ecological fabric. And of course, we've got urban agriculture, which I don't think I'll ever leave that behind me. It just follows me around wherever I go. Areas to influence, these are areas that I can't directly do anything about. They're not within my power to do it, but I can influence them. If you think about the procurement framework within a university, it's like a government's one. It's locked into a linear business model. It's very big businesses that strip off huge amounts of profit to shareholders that live someplace else, often not in the UK. I was going to say they're politicians, but I shouldn't do things like that. But if you look at that model, there's something fundamentally wrong. I can't buy locally because I'm not allowed to, because of our procurement framework. I then somehow fall foul of the university system in doing something which is better for this community and this local environment. We can explore our visitor embedded carbon. I'm looking at how I reward green travel and tax the high CO2. So if you come by car, I'm going to tax you because you're going to pay for that in the car park. And then I will subsidize the use of e-bikes or other foot-based traffic, or using green transport to get to us, because that seems like the right way to do it. The transition from our built environment thinking to a green-blue city campus is something that I set in train already, because I believe we can be a demonstrator at the local level of how the campus can be a micro version of the city. Because wouldn't you like to live and work in a green campus or green city? Wouldn't you like to have a space that you can have as an outdoor teaching or working area and not be limited to the physical spaces of your 6x6 office? These are things that are within the gift of the university to do if we choose to invest, rather than in built structure, in our green-blue structure. And that's a choice. It's a business choice. Rewilding, connecting habitats and landscapes, not just through the city, but through that bioregion, they absolutely make sense. You're seeing rewilding as a big issue. We need to be within that. That's the way that we're going to see landscapes full of eagles and opportunities for people and planet in the future. And the Botanic Gardens as biophilic synthesis, this is the beginning of that journey that we're sharing with you today. Health and well-being integration is something that Dundee has been doing really well with the Green Health Partnership. And we've had a green social prescription trial going on in the Botanic Gardens for the last 4 years. And that's something that we need to influence and make sure it's bigger, it's inclusive, and it affects everyone. And now I'm going to use the Sustainable Development Goals just to show where that links into the bigger global picture that Jackie talked about earlier. So no poverty is something that the University of Dundee is committed to seeing, so we don't pay minimum wage, we pay living wage as an example, but it's something that it's hard for me to influence direct, but it's something that I personally am committed to and will try to work towards. Zero hunger through urban agriculture is something we directly look to prototype and help. Good health and well-being. There are many opportunities for that across the work that we both can prototype, but also influence. Quality education is something that we are instilled, we have to do, it's part of our mission. That's the organization I'm in, and that's the work that we need to be doing. Whereas gender equality or inequality is something that we challenge at every point. This is all inclusive. I happen to be male, but my workforce and the organization I work in has all sorts of talent. It's the right person in the right role at the right time, doing everything. And we need to make sure that we challenge ourselves at each job to make, each time that we get involved in work, to make sure that it's more inclusive, not exclusive. In terms of clean water and sanitation, that's why we're working at the bioregion catchment level. That's where our rainwater lands. That's where it's harvested and put into the reservoirs that eventually end up in our taps. If somebody pees in the water upstream, it's going to poison it down here for us. And we've got to make sure that that's not pollution, pesticides, agricultural, unsustainable land use. And in terms of a global resource, people worry about oil. That's the one you want to worry about. That's the real limit. We all rely on it. We are 70%, no more than that, 90% a bag of water. After all, and most of our food is green bags of water that we transport around the world using fossil fuels. In terms of the affordable and clean energy, we've got the macro micro building, and we talked about the battery storage, decent work and economic growth, but circular growth, not linear growth, is something we're committed to. And being innovative with industry and looking at not just doing things on our own, but in partnership, that we'll come back to later. The reducing inequalities is again core to the university ethos. While sustainable cities and communities is something that our green vegetation, landscapes, green blue water supply is something that we will help take forward there. While encouraging responsible consumption and production, working for climate action at all levels, supporting life below water and above water on land, while building an institution that is fit for the future and encourages peace and justice, but most importantly, partnering. And there is an open door for anyone who wants to partner with us, as long as it's a good fit, and caveat, as long as we have enough capacity. I hope what I've done there is shown that by thinking globally but acting locally, you can make a difference. Using systems, looking at opportunities for biomimicry, biophilia and systems thinking to inform your transition from a linear to a circular business model. Thank you. If you want to learn more, you can go visit our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was absolutely fascinating. It was really great to see how you're thinking of the botanics in a systems thinking kind of way. And also thank you for offering it as an example so in depth. I would like to really quickly go over what we do as Circular Tayside, and then we can go over the questions. Kevin and Jackie, I think that you can see some questions in the chat, so if you would like to prepare your answers, and then we are going to go over them just after my short presentation. Feel a bit, timid to go after Jackie and yourself, Kevin, but I promise it's going to be very short from my side and not as exciting, but hopefully helpful. Right, can you see my screen? Yeah, lovely. So, as we said, my name is Vaso Makri. I manage a Circular Tayside project, and I first want to introduce who we are. I want to go over who Zero Waste Scotland is. So Zero Waste Scotland exists to lead Scotland to use products and resources responsibly, focusing on where they can have the greatest impact on climate change. So Circular Tayside, it's a Zero Waste Scotland project. It's funded by the European Regional Development Funds, and it is delivered by Dundee and Angus Chamber of Commerce and Perthshire Chamber of Commerce. The reason that we are here is because in 2018, Zero Waste Scotland commissioned a report that showed that the local area could achieve economic benefits of about £400 million if they transition to a circular economy, specifically for construction, energy infrastructure, manufacturing, and food and drink. So the project started in 2018 by the chambers, and I joined them in 2019. This is the area where we operate. There are other circular economy projects around. We've got Circular Edinburgh, Circular Northeast, Circular Glasgow, and recently the Highlands and Islands. What do? We help local organizations transition towards circular economy by raising awareness on circular economy, and also by offering one-to-one support. They can reach Zero Waste Scotland business support and Zero Waste Scotland funding where eligible. Let me see if it's plays now. Yeah. So one of the ways that we raise awareness is events like this one. If you go on our website, you can see other events on food waste, circular procurement, agriculture, circular design and education, pretty much anything. And we are always open to hear some events that would be interesting for people so that we can find the speakers and organize them. All of our events are free to access, and the ones that started after the lockdown, they are recorded and you can find them on YouTube and on our website. The other way that we try to raise awareness is to promote local circular businesses. So in our Be Inspired page, you can find businesses from every industry, hospitality, retail, clothes, anything really. And they all have a circular offering for their clients. We are always looking for additional kind of Be Inspired stories. So if you have a business here in the area that has circular elements, please get in touch and we're going to put you up there and up on our Circular Tayside map, which is a very easy visual tool to see where the circular businesses are based and what they are doing. So we are really trying to raise awareness about waste around the area and hopefully get other people to prefer them because they are circular and move towards a more circular economy in that way. We are also very lucky to have our ambassador group. We've got about 40 plus ambassadors that we got since 2019. They are people from academia, local authority and local organizations. As long as they are really motivated about circular economy, they're welcome in this group. And we hold quarterly meetings and they help us design the project better and make it more relevant to their sector. Here you can find videos and short interviews with local organizations. You can see that here we have a chat with Kevin Frediani, but also with others. So please feel free to just go over them and find out who is doing what in the area. Now, oh no, don't click. There we go. And so that is the awareness raising side of it. And for helping the organizations access Zero Waste Scotland support, we have one-to-one meetings with myself where we can discuss circular project ideas and explore them through various tools. When the business is ready, we can refer them to Zero Waste Scotland sectoral experts for construction, manufacturing, food and drink, you name it, Zero Waste Scotland has it. For the Circular Economy Business Support Service, that is bespoke business support by Zero Waste Scotland for businesses that want to create a circular product or project. And we refer them also to the Circular Economy Investment Fund teams. That if an organization is innovative and circular, or they want to commercialize an innovative and circular product, then they might be eligible for grant funding of up to £1 million. That is what the Circular Economy Investment Fund is. So some tools that we use in order to bring businesses up to the level that they can benefit from Zero Waste Scotland support is the canvas that Kevin mentioned. This is just a different design for it, but it has the same fields. And this one usually takes from an hour up to 4 hours, depending on the size of the organization. We're very happy to go over it as many times as needed. And the other tool that we use is the Innovation Canvas that was developed by the Knowledge Transfer Network. And if you have an innovative idea and you would like to see what gaps you have in the idea so far, this is a fantastic tool because it tells you the gaps and it also tells you how to fill them. It's got a very good library of resources that helps a lot in the innovation journey. So this is what we do as Circular Tayside. This is a really fast summary of what we do as Circular Tayside. Please get in touch if you have anything that you would like promoted, or if you would like to investigate further a circular offering from your organization. And after this really, really fast presentation, I would like to go over the questions in the chat. So we have, I think, let me see. So there was a question about biomimicry and design being offered to the public. Jackie, I think that was for you.
I'm struggling to see that.
It was at 11:34.
That was from me, and it might actually be more for Kevin. It was just really when you described taking the students along to the botanics and smelling everything and really experiencing it. And I was just thinking, oh, that would be great as a member of the public. So I guess it's more maybe, do the botanics offer any kind of courses like that? Because it would really tap into the current mental health issues, crises.
Because of the local.
Yeah.
Yep. I think, yeah.
You want to go, Kevin?
I was just going to say, in terms of, as a very good idea, it's in terms of our thinking that's probably a little bit early where we are. One of the challenges in terms of hosting events with things like building ventilation and challenges, as you've probably seen on the television with universities generally, is that we're much reduced in our capacity to actually do things within our facilities. And in fact, I'm not allowed to hold events at the moment, but when we are, that's definitely one of the events I'd look to put on for 2021. And so I put my email up. If you'd like to email me and register an interest, what I'll do is keep you informed and when that comes together next year. So yeah, it's definitely one we'd like to do, but we're not doing at the moment. Good question.
You know, something that I did a few years ago with a few other people in the university was partnered with the Science Centre when they had their science festival, and we organised a walk through the Botanic Gardens, and it was aimed at children, and we naively had never done this before, so we didn't ask people to book. We were just looking forward to welcoming a few children along. We used the Education Centre. We very much used the little film that I showed you a similar way. We created a walkway through the Botanic Gardens, and at different points we suggested that they take selfies of themselves next to their favourite tree, or they touched particular plants. It was actually much more successful than we thought. We had one parent brought 13 children down. And my expectation was that they would come in, they would do the walk, they'd come into the Education Centre, maybe have a juice and some crisps, and then on they would go. No, they wanted to stay in the Education Centre. They wanted to build their little mini gardens and things. And I think actually that says a lot in terms of what can be done. I know at the moment it's very, very difficult. Because of the climate that we're in at the moment, but there are lots and lots of opportunities for us to engage with the public, and I think Kevin has some amazingly fantastic ideas about how the gardens can be used to bring people into the gardens and help them engage with nature in the way that we'd like them to.
Absolutely. For those of you that are Tayside based, there are a lot of local urban gardens. Just in Dundee, I can think of at least 4, and they all have a kind of sensory gardening, either slot or someone. They usually have a horticultural therapist on site, or they will be working with groups that could benefit from horticultural therapy, either people with PTSD or people with autism. If anyone wants to learn a bit more about those community gardens around Dundee, please send me an email and I'll send you a list. Kevin, I think that you have answered a couple more questions that were on the chat. Does anyone have anything else to ask? Don't be shy. Okay. Okay, that is for myself. Okay, well, I would like again to thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry for some technical issues, but also for taking more time from your busy schedule. Thank you very much, Kevin and Jackie, for the fantastic presentations. They were really inspirational. We will share these presentations on our website, and you can see them again in the recording of this video. We've got another question from Tarba about any resources online for education curriculum, biophilia, biomimicry, etc. for school levels, any trainings or courses on circular economy, green entrepreneurship. So on our website, Tarba, we have a learning resources page. You can find some free resources on circular economy. There for different levels. You can find introductory ones and all the way up to MBA. A lot of them are free, some of them you have to pay for, but I know that that's the case for circular economy. I don't know if Jackie has any other resources for biophilia or biomimicry.
Yeah, there's a really wonderful website called asknature.org that the Biomimicry 3.8 Institute run, and that's just full of resources relating to nature. It's fantastic for education at any level. So I would certainly point you there. I'll put that into the chat for you, okay?
That would be perfect. Thanks, Jackie. Thank you. Great. So if no one else has any other questions, or if you think of any other questions after this event, you can always get in touch with me. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining and for presenting in this session.